So welcome back for another Masterclass session with the Austin Civic Wind Ensemble. This is, I believe, our third one. And today we have Michael Melinger, who runs the Austin Jazz Workshop, which is a really cool program that takes jazz performances and jazz education into a bunch of schools. Last I remember, it was about 120 schools a year you do. It's probably more than that now.
Well, this year we had been around 120, 130, but in the pandemic year, of course, we stopped after spring break, so that was only 90.
Yeah. I figured this year wouldn't be too good, but
this year we have 111.
Yeah, but you're doing all those virtual, right?
Everything is virtual this year. Yeah, it's a whole different adventure.
Yeah, so you had to definitely retool for that. But so he does those programs in the schools, and then also does a bunch of teaching and does some regular shows out at Central Market and stuff like that too. He's been part of the Texas Community Music Festival, like the rest of us. So he's a good guy, and he has some good things to say, I think. So go ahead and hit it whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Michael Bell, of course, has been a panelist on the city peer panel reviews many times, and I think that's where we first met.
Yeah.
And just known him for many years, and now, of course, run into him all the time. Used to run into him at the symphony, but unfortunately, that's no longer a thing. So
yeah, unfortunately, hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I look forward to the day when live music can return. I'm sure we all do. And we're taking a somewhat of a calculated risk going virtual this year because I'm doing it out of my home. And we are, I have two crews of musicians who work with us. It's a quintet. So what that means, I'm on every show. So what that means is there's two quartets, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So I've got 8 people coming through my house every Thursday to do, essentially 4 shows back to back with a little break in between as we turn over that the personnel. And at the beginning of the year, I was feeling a little, we all were feeling a little bit, dicey about the whole situation. We were masking up, of course, and keeping social distancing insofar as we could, but you're still in a relatively small space. But I couldn't figure out another way to do it and still serve the schools. And I didn't want to just say, okay, done, we're not going to do it. No, we're going to figure out a way to do it. So
yeah, I'm glad you did that.
Yeah, so that's kind of been the story of this year. And now, of course, we've added the Monday Fun Day series, which is, taking the place of the live performances that the city was funding. But our city funding was going for those emerging jazz talent series that we used to do on the Sundays at Central Market and Opal Divines, where we invite young people to come and sit in with us. But we can't do that this year. So instead, we turned it into a Monday Fun Day where we just do a quintet performance every Monday at noon.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So, and there's a different focus for each one of those. Like we just did a Charlie Parker one. We're taking next week off, but then the following week we're going to be doing Thelonious Monk. So every Monday at noon through April.
Very cool.
Anyway, a little bit of a plug before I get started here.
Yeah, well, might as well.
Yeah. Now, I confess I don't really know exactly who I'm talking to, and that might be helpful in terms of, when I was first talking with Thomas about this, he was saying, you have some high school age people, and then you have some people who are, a little bit older, and obviously, and then you have some retiree type folks, just people who want to keep their hand in playing. My point is this: I am not sure how much of what I had originally planned to say is relevant to the people who are assembled here. I want to kind of throw it out there first to make sure that I'm talking about things that are useful, because I don't want to be repeating things that people already know or whatever. So let me tell you what I was originally planning to do based on the assumption that we would have some younger players here as well. And that was to start by talking about the cycle of fifths and what it is and why it's important, and then how it relates to music, and then how to use it as a practice tool. And that was going to be the first part of what I did here tonight. Now, I don't have to do that. If everybody here already knows everything back and forth, backwards and forwards about the cycle of fifths.
No.
I don't want to bore the pants off people. So you tell me how to, and then I was going to, after the bit with the cycle of fifths and how to practice with it and some suggestions along those lines, then I was going to do some Q&A, and then I was going to move into jazz and kind of relate the same things I was talking about, but in terms of how a jazz musician would approach it in that way. And that's probably of broader general interest. But you tell me if we should do the cycle stuff.
I think that would be good to start. Actually, that will tie in with Robert was doing some music theory classes in the spring, and he was actually getting into the circle of fifths and some of that stuff. So he was talking about it more from a theoretical standpoint. So if you can get into it from more of a practical, playing standpoint and what it means from that standpoint, that'd be good. To give you an idea of what the band is, it's a community band. It's basically an adult band for people who never got over high school band. So we don't have any high school age players. We occasionally have one or two, but most people are post-college. I'd say probably roughly half the band are people who played in high school, went to college, maybe marched a little bit, started a job, and then realized they missed it, and then they're coming back to reacquaint themselves with their instruments. So that's a good chunk of the group, and then there's a handful of people that would probably qualify as semi-professional. So it's a range, but mainly people that just loved it in high school, a little bit in college, and wanted to get back into it again.
Okay, all right, good. Well, that's great. I'll launch into it then, and I'll go as fast or as slow as we need to. If people have questions as we go, I just ask one thing, and that is to maybe make a note of them or put them in the chat if you like.
Yeah, that's what we've been doing with these, is having them ask in the chat.
Okay, that sounds great. But don't be shy about asking questions. Once I get going, it helps if I can just kind of barrel through to a certain extent, and then I promise I will pause, and we will have time for some questions. No,
Michael, I could suggest something. I don't know how many people in this group have used Zoom a lot, but in the reactions button, there's an option for you to choose faster or slower. So if you kind of pay attention, and maybe Mike can moderate that for you, because I know what when you're in it, you may not pay attention to it, but if somebody else pays attention to it and brings it up to you, then we could probably use that. If people feel like we could either slow down or speed up, that would be good.
Yep.
Sure, sounds good. Don't be shy about giving feedback as we go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, in that case, let me go over here, and I'm going to share my screen. And everybody should be able to see the cycle of fifths, correct?
Yep.
Everybody's got it? Okay, good. All right. So I should preface this by saying that, I've taught private lessons for 30 years. And I no longer teach privately, but I taught all levels from, middle, high school, and adults. And I was always a little shocked how few people had an awareness of really what this was, which to me now seems kind of basic, but I'm realizing now that I kind of cast myself back to my middle school and high school years, this was never addressed. This was not something that was ever talked about. You learn notes on a page, and that's it. You learn how to read. You learn how to, get around your instrument. All important things for playing in an ensemble, but reaching beyond that, there was not that much of that stuff. So I decided then and there that I wasn't just going to run scales with my students without giving them a context for understanding what that was, because you got to understand what's going on. All right. So very basically, I like this cycle. This is something I pulled off the internet. There's a ton of cycle of fifths out there. But I will mention, by the way, that all the handouts that I use tonight, I will email to you, Thomas, and you can, and folks, if they're interested on getting these things, they will be there for you if you would like them. You'll have them that you can get them that way. All right.
Even better, if you put those links in the chat, we save the chat and the video and put that on our ACWE site so people can reference it anytime.
Well, I don't know about links for these things. A lot of these things are just private files that I have on my computer.
I got you. Okay.
With the exception of this one. This one I just pulled off the web, but everything else is something that I basically generated. So I'll just send you the PDFs, and you can do them however you want. All right. So cycle of fifths. All right. C major is the key of no sharps, no flats. We all know that one. We love that one. By the way, we're not talking in concert this or B flat that. We're just talking as if we're all playing the same instrument here. As you move clockwise, and the reason, of course, it's called a cycle of fifths is because every note in the sequence is 5 notes higher than the note that preceded it. Okay, so think of it in a scalar way for a moment. So going up 5 notes in key of C major, you hit the note G, which then serves as do of its new key center. Okay, so 5 notes up from G is to D, and it continues like that: A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp. Have a little jog there for some reason. There are 7 sharp scales, and only 7 sharp major scales. There are also 7 flat scales, right? And that goes around this way. Did I say 7? Should have said 6. No, 7. I'm wrong. Yeah, 7. So going this way, you are working into your flats: F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, C flat. And these 3 down at the bottom are inharmonic, so there is that overlap there, but it's really still the same set of notes, or fingerings, I should say, but different pitches. All right. The usefulness of the cycle of fifths is that it gives an order to how we conceive of our scales. Because I've run into a lot of people who just practicing scales is too daunting. You know, it feels like everything is, especially if they're learning them chromatically, you know, like going from C to C sharp to D to E flat. You can do it that way, and it's probably good to do it that way. But you also need to understand how things relate, because all of Western music is a quest of 5 to 1, right? Everything that you see in terms of a cadence in music is 5 to 1, right? So going from F major going up to C, right? C is the 5 chord of F, all right? So in other words, if I'm going counterclockwise, I'm heading home. 5 1, 5 1, 5 1. I'm changing the function in my head, right? So C is the 5, the C dominant 7 going to F major. And then F, let's change it to a dominant, F dominant 7th going to a B flat major. And then now changing the quality again, B flat 7 to E flat major. So really the cycle of fifths is also the history of Western music. There also, by the way, in here is the relative minor to all of these different major key centers. That's useful in understanding, you know, what that is. I don't want to really dwell on that for tonight, because that's a whole nother area of you know, looking at things. But it is useful to know, for example, that the key signature of C major is also based on the 6th scale degree, the key signature of A minor, no sharps and no flats. Okay, and that's true for all these. So as you would expect, these are also working their way around in fifths. Okay, it's a fifth, a major 6th removed from the root of the major. Okay. I hope all that stuff is making sense. But rather than worry too much about it, you can sit with this and peruse it at your leisure. But the thing that I found useful when talking with students and helping them through learning their major scales was understanding that sharps, for example, the sharps are always added to the key signature in the same order. That's really important. And I guess we kind of figure that everybody knows this, but believe it or not everybody knows this. And it's useful information. It's really useful information. Because what it means is if I'm reading, and this has happened before, I worked a gig once that was a pickup gig that was, it was a symphony pops thing. This was back in Eugene, Oregon. And the people who were, the conductor actually was a little bit out of his element for a pops concert, but he had gone on a cruise, and he had heard this duo, this male vocal duo that did, you know, shtick and you know, Mills Brothers medleys and all kinds of stuff like that. He heard them on this cruise that he took, and he was just enchanted with them, and so he hired them to come to Eugene and to play a concert, and which they did. I guess they had some time off from the ship or whatever. So they came and they did this thing. And it was one of those pickup gigs where, you know, in the afternoon, they assembled a band and we read their charts. And then in the evening, we did the show. Okay. Well, as it turns out, their charts were very unprofessionally done. In fact, they were hand done. This was way before all the computer, you know, all the great, beautiful charts that we have now. This was obviously somebody had scrawled this out. And being medleys, especially the Mills Brothers thing, they do like, you know, 12 bars of a tune and then go to another, you know, completely unrelated key for another 8, 10 bars and then go on. It was just like that through the entire chart. And since it was so sloppily written, for example, there was one where it was like, that was the key that we were in, right? We were in this horrendous key of C flat, okay? But it was just a jumble, you know, when you're reading, right? So we don't have time to grab all this stuff. So it was just like blah 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 blah, you know. And you looked at it and you went, oh, okay, well, there's 7 of them. And they look more like flats than sharps. And so I guess I'm in C flat. And really, that is all we had to go with. Now, had I not known the basic understanding of what 7 things looked like, and all I had to figure out was whether it was a sharp shaped thing or a flat shaped thing, I would have been lost. I would have had no idea, you know. And that's kind of where, you know, a lot of students are. They don't really know the sequence. All right. So that was a digression, but it points out what I was going to say, which is that the sharps are always added in the same sequence. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, and so forth, all the way to C sharp, which is, you know, the last one. Well, guess what? That sequence is in the cycle already. We don't have to look at all these little bar lines and try to figure out and count our fingers and toes, because there they are. F, C, G, D, A, E, B. That's the order of the sharps. That's all we need to know. If we see 3 sharps, F, C, G, there it is. We're in A major, okay. Flats, same thing in reverse, right? B, E, A, D, G, C, F. Well, there it is. B, E, A, D, G, C, F. So as soon as you understand that sharps and flats are added in the same sequence, it's a reverse sequence, okay? But as soon as you understand that, it makes reading music a lot simpler, because now I don't have to count on my fingers and toes how many sharps or how many, you know, what they are, because I already know that sequence. So if there's 3 of them and they're sharps, it's got to be F, C, and G. That's all it can be. Can't be anything else. Okay. All right. So that's basically how I approach the cycle of fifths. And one last thing with the cycle of fifths, and this kind of gets into jazz, which I'll get into more, you know, in a little bit. But one last thing is that in jazz progression, the most common building block in jazz is what we call the 2-5-1 progression. Okay, where the quality of the 2 is a minor chord, the quality of the 5 is a dominant chord, and the 1 is usually a major chord. Okay. Of course, jazz tunes tend to modulate a lot, so we don't necessarily have just one set of 2 5s. It could go around into all kinds of key centers. There could be secondary dominants. There can be all this crazy stuff, but still, the basic building blocks of jazz are the 2-5-1 progression. Stands to reason that if we're going to learn how to play jazz, for example, or improvise it, then we need to understand that progression inside out. Okay.
You might want to explain a little bit more what you mean by 2, 1, and 5, because I think there's some people that might not know that.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I did not make a handout for this because I was afraid it was going to get too handout heavy. Okay, but all right. So hopefully that's not going to be too loud for folks. We're in C major. Now let's say we're in G major. It's a little more horn friendly for where I'm at right now at this time of night. Let's say we're in G major. All right, so here's G. All right, so the one chord is thirds based off of G, which would be the notes G, B, D, and F sharp. That's a major, a 7th chord. Okay, now in G, there is a 2 chord, which is built on the 2nd scale degree. It's still built in thirds, okay? So instead of G, B, D, F sharp, we're going to start another 7th chord on the A. That's the 2 chord, okay? Because it's the 2nd scale degree. So that would be an A minor chord. That's the quality of that. It'll be the notes A, C, E, and G, okay? Building straight up. That's what my 2 chord sounds like in G. All right, now there's also a 5 chord, which is built on the 5th scale degree. Well, the 5th scale degree, we already know from our cycle of fifths, is a D. If I build a 7th chord on the root of D, my notes are D, F sharp, A, C. Again, all of our notes are in the key, a home key of G, okay? So we're not trying to trick anybody. All these notes are found in G major scale. We're just ordering them differently. All right, so now we're going to put our 5 in there. Okay, so now we're going to read backwards for a moment. Here's the 2 chord. I'm still in G. Here's the 2 chord, A minor. Here's the 5 chord, D7, D dominant. Here's the 1 chord, G major. Guess what? I can now use the cycle of fifths to practice my 2-5-1 progressions. So let me do just that. I'm going to play up and down these. In fact, I'm just going to play up. I'll play up A minor, up D7, up and down G, so we can hear how that fits. So here's that is. Right, let me do that one more time. Again, I'm playing A minor to D7 to G major. I'm sorry, screwed up. All right, so I'm now practicing my 2-5-1 progression around the cycle of fifths. I can keep that exercise going. I can go up one more, turn that into a minor, that into a dominant. I'm in C major. Again, all the notes that I'm going to find in these 2 chords are found in the scale of C major. There's no surprises, no unusual notes. So same idea. Okay. Does that make sense? Is that we still tracking? Hopefully,
I think so.
Okay, good. So that's why the cycle of fifths is so important. Okay, but let's take a step back from jazz, and let's take a step back from all that wonderful stuff. I assume that if I want to, that I can only share one thing at a time. Is that correct, Michael Bell?
You can either share your whole desktop or you can share individual windows. So if you need to show multiple screens, just select the option to share whatever's on your desktop.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, it's okay. Let me, rather than do that, because I think that might end up being more that my screens they don't all relate to one another.
Michael, we would be able to see what you see. So
Okay.
if you share screen and you adjust anything, we'll be able to see what you see.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, then I'll tell you what, let's try something here. Let me pull up my foundation exercises. Okay. Well, that's okay. We lost the cycle, but that's all right.
Yeah, we're just seeing your files right now. You'll need to go back and either select the file that you wanted to open or select your desktop as what you want to share.
So you're not seeing cycle of fifths foundation exercises?
No, we're still seeing the files because you selected the window that was showing the files, so that's what it stays on.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
But there should be an option that just says like your whole desktop.
How about that?
We don't have anything right now, so.
Okay, hang on. I do this for a living, believe it or not. I haven't had to share multiple files before.
I think the very upper left choice should just show whatever's on your screen.
Yeah, that's usually the one.
Okay, hang on for a second.
Yeah, and once you select it, you got to hit the share button.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. All right. I wonder why. Okay, whatever. Well, okay. I'm sorry, folks. Bear with me for a minute here. I'm a klutz when it comes to this stuff, because I've got to get to the right place. Let me just undo my share altogether.
Yeah, there you go.
And let me close some things real quick. I know how to do it. I just have to count on my fingers and toes to make it work.
Most of us can count to 4.
How about that?
Yeah, we can see your cycle of fifths foundation exercises.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's where I was trying to go. So,
okay.
So I'm glad we finally got there. All right. So this is a thing that I put together. It's really just a starting point for if you really wanted to apply oneself to learning your scales in different ways, learning using the cycle of fifths. Okay, and some different things that one could do to better get your understanding going. A lot of this obviously is just getting it under your fingers. And this kind of list, whenever you see it, it's a little bit daunting at first because you go, "Oh my gosh, I could spend years doing this." And the fact of the matter is, yes, you could, and it's fine that if you do. But even if you only have a little time to do with it, you'll still pick up a lot. All right. So this is the first thing I would have my students do is to be able to learn their major scales, 1 octave up and down around the cycle, both directions. That's useful because, as you're going around clockwise, then most of the time, then you're working in sharps and you're adding sharps. So that enforces what's going on with those sharps. A G, then a D. I'm not going to practice scales for you guys all night, I promise. But I'm just trying to show you what I'm talking about. As you do the same thing around the other way, starting with F, then you're working into your flat. So you got, F, E flat, A flat, D flat, so forth and so on. All right. So that's step 1 of sort of learning your way around the cycle of fifths. And then you start working on arpeggios. Because arpeggios are simply our way of playing chords, right? As a wind instrument person, we can only play one note at a time, but we can suggest chords by playing arpeggios. So we do that same idea I just did, major seventh arpeggios, one octave up and down around the cycle, both directions. Okay. When I say major seventh, I'm talking about that same thing we mentioned a moment ago, 1, 3, 5, 7, through all the keys. So, right. So you're just working your major seventh chords in that way. And you can go the other way, right? You can go into your sharps. Okay, same idea, different direction. So you should do it both directions, right? To get more fluency. The next one is taking major scales, but not doing going up, just work on coming down. The reason this is important is because a lot of times people don't really know where the leading tone is of their chord, okay, or their scale, the leading tone being the seventh degree. It's always in major, it's always a half step below tonic. But for people who are always root oriented, like you're always root bound, going 1, 3, 5, 7, look how high I am. All of a sudden I'm way up there on my F sharp. I'm in G again. Okay, I'm defaulting to G. Okay, I'm way up in my F sharp. Wow, that seems a long way off psychologically from where I started. But if I go down a half step from the octave, it's just right there. It's only a half step away. It's very, very close. So again, that's simple, but the application of it can be profound if you haven't thought of things in that way. All right. So if I take my seventh chords, right, and I'm coming down now. So did I say seventh? Oh, I said scales. I'm sorry. Okay, well, okay, scales. So coming down. All right. So it's a simple idea, but it's coming down instead of going up. Okay. Or if you like, you can come down and go back up, and land back, on the octave. Whatever floats your boat. It's just rearranging the marbles, right? Every scale is just basically a collection of marbles. 7 marbles. You don't want to have them all bouncing off each other. You need to know where they go in their particular position in the scale. You can apply that same idea to arpeggios. Okay, so this is number 4, taking major seventh arpeggios, descending only around the cycle in both directions. So we're just jumping on our seventh in every case. Oh, sorry. Boy, I got lost. Let me try it again. All right, there it is. So I'm working my way around the cycle of fifths, but I'm starting on the 7th scale degree and coming down. All right. So that's your major. Now, then you take the same 4 exercises that we just did, but you apply them to the different scale types that are common, not just in jazz, but in music. They're a common part of music, the dominant scale. Okay, so that's spelled with a 1, 3, 5, and a lowered 7th degree. Okay, so I'm not going to do all that for you because it gets really dull, but essentially you take these 4 exercises and you apply them to dominant scales, then you apply them to minor scales, 1 flat 3, flat 5, flat 7, and then you apply them to half diminished scales, 1 flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. Now, of the 3, that's probably the least important. So if you're going to say, well, my eyes are rolling backwards in my head, Mr. Melinger, I can't handle this, then I would say, yeah, well, just get rid of 7 for a while. Don't worry about 7. but do concentrate on the dominants and the minors, because you're going to always run into dominants and minors in the world. That's just part of the building blocks of music. So we need to understand those. So what this does then is it creates 12 exercises, okay? And it's really more than that because we're changing directions on some of these. So, you know, it's I don't know how many it is, 20 something. So these are basic. This first level is basic. This is stuff that these are foundation exercises that I would say every player should have under their fingers. And if you don't, then that's a good project to work on, right? Just to get fluency. And by the way, this is not just for improvisation. This is all, although it comes in handy, but it's not just for improvisation. It's also for skill of reading, because again, you're always reading music that modulates, that changes keys, or that is in difficult keys for you, you know? So it's a way of evening that out, getting more comfortable so that you don't hit those keys that automatically you just go, oh, D flat again. Oh boy, I hate this key. Well, you don't have to hate D flat. You can figure it out and then you'll have it. Moving on then from that, you hit some more advanced sequences, which is basically just kind of making you think faster a little bit. For example, number 8 here, up one major scale and then down the next around the cycle. Okay, so we've already practiced coming down the scales, right? We practiced going up, we practiced coming down. Now we're just going to alternate those two things. So, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm alternating. I forgot I was supposed to be alternating. Let me try it again. Right. So it just puts things in a different spin. And then you repeat this sequence for, you know, your dominants, your minors, and your half diminished. Okay, there's a lot of work right there. You know, it looks innocent, number 9, but that takes some work. Number 10 is the same idea, but using arpeggios instead of scales. Okay, so we're going back to our constructs of 1, 3, 5, 7. And again, let's say we're going to stick with major, right? So I'm going to go around counterclockwise. I mean, clockwise this way. So I'm working to sharp. So. Right. So again, it's just, you're just trying to get fluency. You're just trying to get fluidity. Okay. And then repeat that sequence for, you know, your dominant, minor, and half diminished. These last ones are ones that don't have less to do with trying to do a timed thing, you know, a rhythmic thing with the cycle, but just, can you do it? Major scales, full range of your instrument, okay? Range scales are really important. You don't have to go crazy with it, brass players. You don't have to go absolutely insane, but just, you know, within the comfortable range of your instrument, but you know, pushing that range as much as you can, all the way up, all the way down. All right, and then the rest of this starts moving into more jazz stuff. Also on this handout is something that I was preparing not just for students who were just, you know, learning their instruments, but also jazz players. So all this recommended books for further study, these are things that I've found useful in the past. Now, I got to level with you. I stopped buying jazz books probably about 30 years ago. There may be some wonderful ones out there, some wonderful methods that have, you know, cropped up in the meantime. I won't know about it, but it doesn't matter because these ones are sort of your basic ones that are just very, very useful. Okay. 30 years is a bit of an overstatement, but I don't think I bought anything in 20 years. I would draw your attention on this. All of these are good. Not all are indispensable. It depends on your focus. But I think the one that everyone should have is Patterns for Jazz. But this relies on ear training, because you only get, he gives you a pattern. He gives you a whole book of patterns, but he only in one key. So you got to take it to the other 12 keys based on your awareness. So in other words, you got a lot of homework to do before you even start this book. Okay. Once you do it, though, it is catapult to bigger and better and greater things, certainly. Whenever you see Jerry Coker's name on anything, usually worth it. So Patterns for Jazz is the biggie. This is a more recent one, this Elements of the Jazz Language. It came with an audio cassette at one point. I'm sure it's probably a CD by now, or maybe it's all online, who knows. And then skipping ahead, the Charlie Parker Omni book. This is a book of transcripted solos about Charlie Parker. It has been transcribed from the E flat that he played it on, alto saxophone, into B flat for tenors, concert, and also bass clef for trombonists. So it's a useful resource. And then there's the Jamie Aebersold Play Along series. This says 114 volumes and counting, which just goes to show you, because I'm sure he's up to about 150 by now. Lord knows how many of those things there are, but they are very useful as play-alongs. Okay. I'm going to stop my share for a moment. I did want to, as I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to give you guys a chance to ask questions if anyone had any for me. And I'll tell you what, maybe I should just look in the chat and see if there have been.
None so far.
Okay.
Just students passing notes while the teacher's talking.
Okay. Well, let me just ask, does anybody have any questions over anything we've talked about so far, would like anything clarified? I'm happy to do that.
There's a good one that just came in.
Oh, how do you keep all the scale practice not boring? Well, that's a good question, because it can get very boring, right? Scales are one of those kind of things where I do believe it's best to chip away a little bit at them each day, but not feel like you have to conquer the mountain in a week, because you won't, number one. And also, you need to have something in your practice session that's fun every single time that you practice. So yeah, you have to be diligent with scales, but it is really easy to get burned out on them too. Band in a Box with the rhythm section. Yeah, that's a great source right there. There are some good Jamie Aebersold volumes. I don't know too much about Band in a Box. I've worked with Aebersold, but there's some good stuff that he has done that is based on the cycle of fifths, and just sort of there's one double album that he did years ago called Turnarounds, Cycles, and 2-5-1s. And that's what the whole thing is. It's turnarounds, cycles, and 2-5-1s. Essentially what he's handing you is the building blocks of jazz and saying, here, practice these in all 12 keys, and they have instrumental backing. Okay. So that's useful. Other tools and apps, I'm sure there are some great ones. I think ultimately what you have to do is sit down, and I know people hate to hear this, but what you have to do, at a certain point, is just sit down and plow through your scales to some degree. I'm not saying do everything in a day, because that sounds contradictory what I was just saying. But you do need to get far enough along, and here's the rule, as I've always presented it to my students. In a practice session, a good one, you should do something that you should work from, where you started, from before where you started last time, especially in scale work. Start, back in maybe one or two exercises before where you stopped. Reinforce what you've done, and then push forward for maybe one or two more concepts, and then stop, And the next day you come back, and, here's where a notebook comes in handy if you need it. Next day you come back, and you back it up 2 or 3 before where you stopped last time, and you push it 2 or 3 further than you did, that time. And you just keep building on it in that way. You don't have to practice you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you sit down to your instrument, but it does help to reinforce for lots of reasons. First of all, you're getting it in your head and your ear, but also you're getting, your finger memory and your pitch memory, all that stuff. So it's the foundation. So you shouldn't feel bad about spending a lot of time doing it because you are building your foundation. Question, do you find chord note practice better than full scale practice? Chord note meaning
what I mean is you've been talking a lot about seventh chords and playing the notes in the chords up and down. Those who are playing the full scale for each key. Is one practice better than the other for certain things?
Well, for certain things, certainly. If you're trying to hear the chord progression of a tune, then yeah, chords, arpeggios are great. I don't think one is intrinsically better than another, I guess. And you do need both. We don't want to sound like we're always playing chords, and we also don't want to sound like we're always running scales. We need to find a balance. In jazz, there's something that players use a lot of times, which is called the bebop scale. There's not really such thing as a bebop scale. I mean, there's major scales, there's minor scales. A bebop scale is just a kind of a concept as opposed to a key center. Bebop scale is taking a descending dominant scale, a descending dominant scale. All right, well, okay, that's beautiful. On the seventh chord, it's not going to work. Why? Well, because none of the important chord tones line up on the downbeats. They're all up on the upbeats. So the important chord tones are the seventh, fifth, third, coming down. All right, that doesn't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to slide a half step in to make it all come out right. That half step is the note in G, is the note F sharp. Okay, it's between the octave and the seventh. Now all of a sudden, all the notes that we want, the important tones, the information tones, that seventh and third primarily, they're going to now land on our downbeats because we stuck in that half step. That's what a bebop scale descending sounds like. And how many times have you heard a jazz lick that starts that way? Right? I mean, it's just, it's just one of those things. It's just a kind of a little trick of music, but somebody decided to put a name on it, and so it became the bebop scale. And if you go to David Baker, who is like the scale, he likes scales a lot. Let's put it that way. All right. So he's got whole books about scales. And so if you look at he had a series called How to Play Bebop that was, they broke out into like 3 or 4 different volumes. And the first volume is all about the bebop scale. He could have said it in 2 paragraphs. He didn't have to write an entire book about the bebop scale, but I guess, repetition is its own reward. So, but that's a situation where a scale kind of helps you outline a chord. And ultimately, that's what they do anyway. Okay, let's see. Thomas had his things. When jazz musicians go through 30 chord changes in a bar or two is always fascinating me. How do you go about reading a chart or playing any tune that has such a rapid progression? That's a good question. Now, there's several different ways to approach this, and it kind of depends on the tune, because some tunes you can break things down into a subset. You can harmonically analyze the whole tune based on one key center, and the other digressions that look like digressions aren't really. They just are secondary dominants, or temporary key signatures, key centers. That may or may not be helpful, but at least you can kind of see it of a piece. Then you take another tune like Giant Steps, for example, John Coltrane's, where where he's throwing stuff at you just right and left. And you have to learn those progressions on their own terms. And how you do that is somewhat up to the individual player. There's a tedious way to do it, and there's a somewhat less tedious way to do it. But ultimately, it's tedious. I wish I could say it wasn't. But you have to, because it's not just learning the tune in the key it's written. It's learning the tune in all 12 keys, or at least 6 keys, right? Especially if it's a John Coltrane Giant Steps progression, which we will look at tonight. I promise. We're actually going to look at the Giant Steps progression. I don't want to not do that, so we will. So maybe I'll save some of this for that, but really, essentially, it's the same thing as how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. That's pretty much it. So, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to move into, unless there's any other questions that somebody has live or not. I'll move into the jazz. It kind of looks like we're sort of leaning that way anyway. 7 concepts. We got it. We see it. All good. Everybody can see that. Okay. I was trying to, thank you. Again, a lot of the time when I'm doing this, or when I was doing it, I no longer teach privately. When I did, what I was trying to do was to give students things that would inform how they are playing right now, because a lot of this stuff, if you give them too many note choices, then they do one of 2 things. They freak out and freeze up, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And they can't do anything. Or they try to do too much, which is beyond their capability of where they are as a player at that particular instant. So I thought, well, what can I do that's like just away from scales, away from the page, and just helps them get a concept? Because a lot of times folks just need a concept. So I came up with these 7 concepts, okay, for successful improvisation. And the very first one, probably one of the most important ones and one of the most overlooked ones, is if you're playing a tune that you plan to improvise on, you must know the melody of that tune. You must know how the tune goes. And it seems obvious, but people sometimes tend to skip that and want to rush right into the goodies of making something up. Well, the melody itself was there for a reason. Especially if it's a Tin Pan Alley type tune that was never meant to be improvised over at all. It was just meant to be, the melody was the currency of the tune, right? So there was something there. There was a reason they wanted that, which, by the way, is another reason why vocalists who don't sing the melody of a song should stop and learn to sing the melody of the song. I'm all for creativity and everything, but come on, know the song. You chose the song for a reason, right? You want to sing it. Thank you. Mike Bell agrees with me. And yeah, it's just one of those things, as they say. All right, I digress, but this is, you'll learn that I do that a lot. Okay. Many good ideas can come from the melody. Embellish what's already there. Sure, that's a great idea. Change the phrasing, create new rhythmic interest, etc. All right, so that's thing number 1. Number 2 is to know the form. Man, so many people don't grasp this. When you're playing a jazz tune, you're playing a song that starts here and ends here, and then it gets recycled for people's solos. That's called a chorus. As many times as you do that, that's taking one chorus. All right. You can take 1 chorus in your solo. You can take 7 choruses in your solo. You don't know. The rest of the band doesn't know. You're not going to tell them, right? How will they know? Because you're going to signal when you get to the end of your solo. You're going to let people know I'm ending. This doesn't have to be verbal. In fact, it shouldn't be verbal. It's nonverbal. But we are maintaining a form, and that goes for everybody in the band, including the drummer, right? Drummer takes a solo. Man, they better hold on to that form, More to the point, the people who are not drummers, who are waiting to come back in, they need to hold on to the form too. So in your mind, you've got the form going in your head all the time that somebody is playing. So that's the responsibility of players in a jazz band. And you can really tell when people get lost. All right. And I'm not going to say it's never happened to me. It's happened to everybody. You know, people get lost, and then and then you'll see somebody, you know, look around the band and go, "Top? Are we at the top?" And the other person goes, "No, we're at the bridge." You know, so all that stuff is important. We'll talk more about form in a minute, but basically just the fact that it exists is very important. And again, always surprising how many people don't grasp this concept. But if you don't grasp the idea of form, then you're going to be lost in 32 bars. It's all over in 32 bars. You're not going to know where you are. What do we do now? Well, you had to jump back up to the top. Okay, it's, you know, I say it like it's obvious. And it is, because I've been playing for so many years, but it's not obvious if you haven't done this, you know, so I understand that. So that's an important thing, though, really important thing. This third one, use of space. Wow. Again, so many times people try to fill up everything. They panic, they freeze, they need to fill up. They feel like they got to be always talking. It's the equivalent of, you know, going out on a date and your date doesn't say anything, so you find yourself blabbering just to keep the conversation up, and you start saying ridiculous things. It's kind of a psychiatrist trick, come to think of it. Anyway, point is, use some space. What you do, what you play, and what you don't play is just as important. So as you're, you know, usually it's like, you know, okay, I'm going to make a statement, and then I'm going to embellish it, or maybe not. Maybe I'll move on. But if I don't set it apart, it's not going to sound like anything. So I'm going to. That was 3 ideas. But if I played. That's just garbage. That's just, you know, that's just vegetable soup. That's not going anywhere. So you have to, whatever you're playing, have to set it off with a little bit of space. How much? Up to you. There's no hard and fast rule. This bit, kind of number 4, kind of builds off of number 3, which is to build something, to start simply, and then to listen to what you play, because, you know, if you're not listening, nobody else is. And then develop that, okay? And Sidney Bechet, who was a wonderful saxophonist and clarinetist, you know, back in the 20s, complained that, you know, a lot of these old cats, and you know, Louis Armstrong was the same way. When bebop came along, they were kind of horrified. There were so many notes, you know, and it was such nonstop, you know. It felt, you know, Louis Armstrong said, that's Chinese music, you know, kind of famously. So they didn't really, they were old school, right? But you got to learn the old school, I think. And there's a reason that they were old school too. It's because, you know, when the early days of jazz, it wasn't necessarily the complex harmonies and the things that we're hearing thrown at us so quickly today. That really wasn't what it was about. It was about telling a story. And that's still true even today. So that's really, really important. And then, of course, knowing the tradition. I don't have to dwell on this too much, but a lot of students don't know the tradition. And so I was throwing some names at them and saying, hey, look, here's the folks that you should know about. Listen to these people. And I used the analogy. I said, imagine how difficult it would be to learn to speak French if you only studied it out of a book but never heard it spoken aloud. You can't do that, okay? And jazz is the same way. It's an oral tradition. So your ears are really your greatest tool. Keeping it rhythmic. I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but it's basically trying to figure out a rhythmic concept. And you know, that sounds great, but it's not an easy thing to do. And some people spend years doing this, and it's all right if you do. So it's not the kind of thing that you go, I have people beating themselves up about this. They say, oh, you know, I can't swing. You know, that's my problem. I just can't swing. Well, guess what? You can swing. Everybody can learn how to swing. but it's a redefining of how you play your instrument, okay? The way you feel the time. And it doesn't help the fact that most people, when we get a little bit nervous and we get into unfamiliar terrain, we start to rush a little bit. You start to talk faster, you start to play faster. And rushing is anathema to jazz. You want to, if anything, you want to lay back, okay? But that's not always easy to do in the moment. So you have to work on developing that. That's where play-along records come in very handy, because you can always start a play-along record over again. You can hear what they're doing. You can hear the drums, you hear the boom, boom, boom. You hear all that stuff going on, and then you have something to push against. So play-alongs are very useful for this. The other thing that I used to also mention to my students, this goes back to the bebop scale, is like, okay, play a bebop scale. Okay, now play it in a swing feel. Yeah, now let's do it without all the heavy tonguing in there. Okay, well, that's wrong too. And why is it wrong? Well, because you're emphasizing, naturally enough, the downbeats. Well, guess what? Jazz happens on the upbeats. All right. So now let's turn that around. So you're going to put a slight push on the upbeat, not a big one. I was overstating it now, like I usually do with them students. I'm really overselling it so they can hear what I'm talking about. But let's do it in a more subtle manner now, and let's do it on the upbeat. So, all right, okay, now it's starting to sound more like jazz, because I'm putting a little push on the upbeat. So that's what creates the swing in jazz. It's the balance. The downbeat is longer. It's 2/3 of the beat, roughly. The upbeat is 1/3 of the beat. So how does it not end up being yanga, 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 yanga? Well, because we are taking the emphasis and we're putting it on that weaker upbeat, okay? The shorter, I shouldn't say weaker, a shorter upbeat. Now I've created a balance and a tension in my line, because the longer note is the softer note, and the shorter note is the louder note. And when you string them together like that, then you have what approaches a jazz feel. Okay, so that's where that comes from. Now, that's easy to say and harder to do, but that is essentially what is going on in terms of keeping it rhythmic. You can also take very simple ideas. Sonny Rollins did this famously in his Blues 7 solo, where he plays his first several choruses, I think, of a 12-bar blues progression on just one note. And he just does different weird rhythmic things with that one note. So Sonny Rollins can do that kind of stuff, but so can you, right? You can always work on limiting yourself too, which is a useful tool when you're improvising. Say, okay, I'm playing a blues, so I know that these notes will work. I know these 7 notes will work, but I'm only going to use 3 or 4 of them. I'm going to choose which ones, and now I'm going to try to make an idea, a chorus, out of just these 3 or 4 notes. Excuse me. So it's useful sometimes to limit yourself, so you're not presented with too many choices. And now we can concentrate on just making it rhythmic. We're not going to have to worry about notes. We don't have to hunt down notes. We already know what they're going to be. G, B flat, C, D flat. That's all we need, right? We'll play the whole blues on that. So now let's just play with those notes and concentrate on doing something rhythmic and interesting. And the last one is a advanced concept, which is to use interesting harmonic devices. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this tonight, but I did refer to elements of the jazz language for the developing improviser, which I made reference to a little earlier in the Jerry Coker book. There's lots of things that you can do, but this is an advanced thing, and really, if you're there already, then there's lots of stuff that you can do. And if not, then there's no point in stopping there. Or there's no point in starting there, I should say. Excuse me. All right. So those are my 7 concepts, and I found them useful to differing degrees. But if the student is ready to hear something, then it can help. All right. So I like this handout, and it will be available to you. Okay. Let me. Okay. You must not like the versions of the national anthem and the Super Bowl pregames. Yes, yeah. Okay, so a question. Can I talk a little bit more about the importance of rhythm? Maybe I already did that. Warren, did you have any? You can unmute and ask me if there was anything you want me to elaborate on.
I kind of thought it would be an interesting artifact also to go with the scale and chord tone practice to introduce some rhythmic functions as well, based on the style you're going for. Oh
yeah, sure. Well, ultimately, I think what you end up doing is, a scale is a scale is a scale, right? It's always going to kind of sound like one. So is an arpeggio. It's always going to kind of sound like an arpeggio. So I think with the exception of the bebop scale, which kind of fits naturally into, which is not even a scale, as we said, but it does kind of fit naturally into the flow of a lot of lines. I think that maybe you're better suited learning patterns, okay? Because as you learn patterns, you're learning like a whole chunk of an idea. It does not have to be a complicated idea, but just a short idea. And then trying to make that as rhythmic as you possibly can. Understanding that swing is not the only rhythm out there, right? We also want to be able to play with even 8th note rhythms of various kinds. Some that could be Latin type rhythms, or it could be a funk rhythm. All these things have very different styles of phrasing and emphasis and accenting. And so I'm focusing on jazz just because it's maybe less familiar for a lot of folks, but really it's learning, how to move from one style to another and doing these things on different cells, if you will, or portions of a lick. Okay, and then just trying that in different rhythmic ways. Okay, so here's a chart for There Will Never Be Another You. Okay, I just pulled this out of the real book, so I can't share it with you. I can share it with you tonight, but I can't send it to you as a handout. But the real book is easy to find. And in fact, a lot of these charts are already online anyway now. But this is an old standard, and this kind of plays into your rhythm question. If you look at it, let's leave the form behind for just a moment. You notice that the whole darn thing is written out in quarter notes, practically. Well, now, if we played the thing in quarter notes, it's going to sound like not a good song, right? So, but let me do it for a second, just because I want to put you through it, right? So we'll play. All right, that's lovely, but it's not jazz. So if I'm going to play this song in a jazz context, which I would certainly expect I would probably be doing, then I'm going to have to make those phrases pop a little bit more. I don't want to change them. In terms of the notes, I want the notes to still be there. I want the basic relationships of the notes to still be there in the thing. But how else can I play it that's more interesting? All right, I've made it more interesting now. And I've stayed correct in terms of the number of beats. I haven't got ahead of the time or behind it. I'm still with it. So that's thing number one, is just, you know, taking a chart and trying to make it more relevant to a jazz context. Thing number two is to understand the form of the song. Now, a lot of, you know, these old songs like this, many times are in 32 bars, okay? And again, this is not going to happen once and done. This is going to happen, we're going to cycle through it. That's why the form is so important, because we're continuously cycling through it. You know, we'll play the melody, that's once to the form. First soloist, oh, I'm taking 4 choruses, zing, 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 you know? Okay, second soloist, he's going to take some choruses too. And then, you know, eventually we'll come back and we'll end the thing. But we have to understand the form to do that. So the form of this particular tune is slightly unusual. A lot of times you see AABA. This is ABAC, okay? And if people are wondering how we get those letters, whatever happens first, that is not an introduction, that is part of the actual form, is letter A, okay? If a new thing happens after that A, that's going to be our B. If we ever go back to the first thing, that's another A. And if we go to something that is new or different enough from B or A, then that's a C. There's lots more letters in the alphabet. We can keep going with this, but you know, in terms of you know, most standard type tunes, 10-pan alley type tunes, usually it's going to be A, B, C, some degree thereof. This being a real book chart, none of those letters were on the chart, so I added them myself by hand. Okay, so the first thing that happens in this tune is an A section that is 8 bars long. In fact, each of these sections, I'll kill the suspense right now, each of them is 8 bars long. Okay, so this is 8. All right, that's my first stopping point, and that's the first thing that's happened, and that's 8 bars, and that's A. Now we get a new idea. It goes somewhere else, melodically speaking and harmonically speaking. So okay, so that's new. That's B. But now we're back. Oh, new A. Second A. Now that A is identical to the first A. Had it been slightly different, then I could have written A prime, you know, but it does, that's a nitpicky thing, but you know, it's still an A section. So, and then it goes somewhere that's similar to the B section, but it doesn't end the same way. In fact, it ends taking us back to our home key of F. So here's the last section, which I'm calling C. Some people might call it B prime. Both are fine. Neither's wrong. Now we're back home, back in F. Okay. If you notice, the first time B didn't end us in F. It ended us going 2, 5, 1, F. There's our F. Okay, but it's not in the B section. It's back the first A again. Second A. All right. Okay. So now I've got an idea of the form of this tune. So now I have a fighting chance if I'm improvising. At the very least, if I get lost, I'll know how to be able to find myself again. Why? Because I'm listening for those chord changes. Okay. Let me, oh, good. I figured out how to do a thing. I'm so proud of myself. Okay, I'm making it smaller now so we can see the whole chart at once. Somebody could have told me that, you know, I don't mind creative advice. All right, so there's the whole thing. My A section, my B section, my A section, my C section. So how am I going to improvise? Well, now I'm looking at this thing as a lead sheet, right? So now I've got to look at the chord changes. So I notice that I'm in F major, and then I've got a what's known as a minor 2, 5 to D minor, okay, which is the 6th chord in F major, but for this purposes, it's being a temporary key center, okay. And then we're going to go 2, 5 into a new key center, which is B flat major. Well, B flat major is the 4 chord of F major, okay. So these are still related, all right. And then 2, 5. You see how prevalent the 2-5 progression is? After seeing it so many times, they just pop out at you like little neon signs. Okay. F major to D minor to G7, 2, 5, 2, 5, 1. Boy, a lot of 2 5s in this thing. If I know my 2-5 progressions, I'll be doing fine. Here it is again, because now this is just like this. The second A, just like the A up here, F major, same changes. E half diminished to A7, D minor, C minor, F7. Gee, that looks familiar because we just had it right here, the same 8 bars. And then the ending of the tune starts like this. This one B section was B flat major, E flat 9, F major, D minor. Excuse me. Well, this is close to the same thing. B flat major, E flat 9, F major. Then we're starting to cycle through 2, 5. That's how we're going to define that. All right, so this is just taking us basically starting a cycle, working backwards for where we want to go. Excuse me. A lot of music, although it happens for us in a linear fashion, starting from start to finish, what you got to understand is the composer didn't do it that way. The composer thought, where do I want to end up? And what do I have to do harmonically to get me there? So sometimes when you see a jarring chord change, like for example, this B minor 7, how does that fit to B flat major? It doesn't. It never did, okay? I mean, I guess if you really, bent over backwards, you could find a connection there, but that's not what the composer thought or worried about. The composer thought, I want to end in F. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to back up, do my 2, 5 in F, but I want to keep cycling. So I'm going to 2, 5 into G minor. There's my 2, 5 in G. Tracking, okay? And then this is a half step to this E7. Okay, that sounds good. Okay. So the composer wasn't thinking about, what in the world, how did I find this, B minor in relation to the B flat major? Because he wasn't thinking about that, okay? He was thinking about where do I want to end up and how do I get there in a creative way? So, so this is just a half step. You back up for a minute. B minor, E7, that's a 2, 5 into what would be A, perhaps, if we're going there. But we don't get there. We go up a half step to an F. And now we have chromatic motion, which is interesting. And it's all about momentum, right? This whole thing, this whole last 5 bars of the tune has to do with momentum back to 1. Everything that happens prior to that is in service to that momentum.
That E7, though, kind of functions like a 5 to F major if you left out the tonic and added a 9, though, right? It kind of is the same.
If you left out the tonic, but you added the 9, so
that's what E7, E major 7 to F is kind of the same as a 5 to 1 for F if you just hear it with the tonic missing and the 9th added.
Right, yeah. Although what's the quality of that? Are you still maintaining the dominant aspect of the chord?
Well, it sounds like, I mean, even though it's half diminished, it sounds, it kind of still functions as a 5-to-1.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Yes, good point. So there's all different things that you can look at in the thing, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is that once you hear where the tune wants to cadence, then it makes improvisation a lot simpler, because now all of a sudden we don't have to stop and think, oh, what does this chord do? Instead we're thinking, where's the flow going of this whole thing? Where are we moving and where are we resting? Because anybody who has ever gone river rafting knows there's certain places where you have to keep moving, and there's other places where you can kind of pause for a breather. And tunes are the same way, I think. So as you're listening for that, I think it can be very helpful. All right, so now then, on its most basic form, I think what I would do is, I was learning this tune, is I would go through it and I'll be playing roots. Sounds simple. Right, okay. Then I would go back and I'd add, thirds, fifths, ultimately sevenths. So I'm playing the arpeggios. I'm just trying to play, not anything crazy. I want to hear the sound of that arpeggio in my ear, but I want to do it in such a way that it fits rhythmically into the tune. So in other words, this F major 7 that it starts with, I've got to play an 8-beat idea because it lasts for 8 beats. This one only lasts 4, this one lasts 4. Okay, so. So, and there's one time through the thing. Now, if I can do that several times running and not get lost, then I know the tune. And then at that point, I can, I can embellish, I can improvise, I can actually take more liberties because I understand, where the form of the tune is. Again, this is the kind of thing where it's useful to have a play along, because it's, it's a little bit artificial for me to be doing it, arpeggiating my way through it. I'm just kind of trusting all of our ears to be able to hang in there, including my own, to be able to hang in there with it and hear what's going on. But, with a play along, it would be, a little bit more clear. You'd have a bass, you'd have, a chordal instrument happening, and make it that much easier. I wanted to show you this because this is a good example of a type of tune that you would encounter, and maybe how one you would approach it if you were, working towards improvisation and incorporating still those same elements, which is rhythmic interest, use of space, and first and foremost, form. What is the form of the tune? You always got to know. It's always, first and foremost in one's mind. Okay. I have one more share, but let me stop. I'm going to pause there before I go to my last share, and ask if there's any questions over any of that stuff. I can pull that chart back up if anybody wants it to be. Don't I mean bebop? I'm not sure what that was in reference to. I guess I do. I always mean bebop. Was that something, James? Well, anyway, were there any questions about any of this or discussion? I'm open to it. Oh, I see. Okay, it was a funny. Never mind. Okay. Then, that being the case, let me close this. Okay. This is my last handout of the evening. You'll be happy to know. Okay. You know what? I can make this bigger. I can start with it a little bit bigger. Another thing that I like to do with my students, because they didn't always hear the chord changes, is I wanted to give them a tool that they didn't necessarily have to have a piano player on hand or a bass player. They could still play it. So, and I also wanted to impress upon them and everyone the importance of the third and the seventh, because that's where all the information really is in a chord. Not all, but a lot of it. Because if you look at the three basic chord types, which are major, dominant, and minor, each of them has at least one difference from all the others in the third and the seventh, the quality of those notes. That's what makes them unique to one another. That's what defines them. So in a major chord, the third and the seventh are both major, or you know, or a perfect fifth if you're looking at the let's leave the fifth out of it. Okay, so you know, major third, major seventh. A dominant is a major third, lowered seventh, and a minor is a lowered third, and usually a lowered seventh. Doesn't have to be, might not be, most frequently is. Okay. So I said, well, you know what? Then let's just use a shell of those notes, those important notes, the third and the seventh, and let's apply it to some real world playing situations like the blues. We're going to encounter that a lot. So here's a blues progression in F, right? And by the way, the one chord is a dominant chord in the blues. So don't be wrung out by saying, well, that should be that's a one chord. That should be a major seventh. Not in the blues. You know, it's the lowered seventh is just prevalent. So this is a standard blues, believe it or not. So it goes 1, 4, 1, 4, 4, 1, 5, 4, 1. About as basic as you can get in a blues. So I said, okay, let's go through our basic thing now, and let's put the thirds and the sevenths on the staff. Where do I put it on the staff? Doesn't matter. We're in comfortable place on the staff. Put it somewhere it's comfortable for you to play. All right, there it is, comfortable. Here's my E flat, and there's my A being the third, E flat being the seventh. My second bar, I'm going into my B flat 7 chord. So I'm going to look at the third and seventh there and try to make the smoothest possible connection. Okay, that's what a guide tone analysis is. So now I'm going to move from the E flat, from the 7 to the third of the B flat 7. And same thing over here. I'm going to take the A, the third, and move it to the A flat to the 7. Okay. So now what I'm going to do when I'm sitting with my students is I'm going to take some little snazzy figure, and I'm going to take the top line, and my student's going to take the bottom line, right? My student couldn't make it here tonight, so I'm just going to play the top line, but I'm going to try to play something that sounds, you know, interesting, like a blues background, right? So there it is, okay. But my student is on the bottom line playing. Now you can do this with another person. It's kind of cool. Okay. And you put both things together, and it sounds pretty obvious that you're playing through a blues progression. Okay. What does it mean to the improviser? Well, those are notes to aim for. Those are the notes I want to hit, right? If I want to make my blues sound meaningful, I'm going to have to, hit those notes as I'm improvising. Always, everyone? No, but enough of them to get the flavor of what's going on. Enough of them in there, I can deviate too. Obviously, I'm a jazz musician. I'm going to do all kinds of stuff, but if I hit enough of them, then it'll be convincing. All right. So that's a standard guide tone analysis, all right, for a standard blues. We can apply this concept to any tune of any type. I just chose blues because it's, more accessible. So I said, well, let's put it on a more complex set of chord changes that's still a blues, okay? So I chose Blues for Alice, the Charlie Parker tune, because Charlie Parker, being a bebop guy, liked to add in lots of chords in temporary chord centers. So this goes back to what Thomas was talking about earlier, how, what do you do when they're throwing things at you really fast in the course of just a few bars? Well, this is the kind of thing that can help you find your footing with it. So Charlie Parker took the blues in F, and he said, all right, you know what? Let me come up a little bit. Here's your standard blues in F. And the important thing about a blues in F, or any key, I mean F, and the important thing about the blues form, 12-bar blues form, is that most often, when you get to the 5th bar, you will be on the 4 chord. All right, that's one of the things that defines it. I'm listening for that. If I'm playing a blues, I'm listening for that. Where do we go to the 4 chord? That's bar 5. Okay. Now, Charlie Parker does the same thing, but he doesn't start with an F7 chord. He starts with an F major chord. Okay. Why does he do that? Well, first of all, because he's Charlie Parker, but also because he plans to do a lot of modulation. And so what he's doing is saying, okay, well, I want to land on B flat 7. That's where I'm going. That's the blues. I got to get there. That's my target. How do I work backward from there? 2, 5. Yay, 2, 5 into B flat. That's cool. Well, let's keep on that track. 2, 5 into C. This was a 2, 5 into B flat. This is a 2, 5 into C. Jazz, by the way, has a lot of what we call pivot chords that have 2 functions. It has a function from where it's been, and it has a function for where it's going. Okay, so that's just standard. How am I going to get to this D minor here? Well, I'm going to do a minor 2, 5, well, half of one. Do E minor 7 to A7 to my D minor. All right, so now what had been fairly static previously, this was a big innovation in 1942 or something, whenever he came up with this. The blues for years had been this very static thing. Charlie Parker said, well, no, let's make it more interesting. Let's add all this modulation, not really modulation. It's really a 2, 5 downstep. Well, I guess you can call it modulation, downstep modulation to the B flat. We're still getting to the B flat in bar 5. We're just getting there in a more interesting way. So now we're playing. Touchdown. We're in B flat. Wait, but we got to the B flat. Okay. Well, we got there in a more interesting way. And then we changed the quality of that B flat to a minor pivot, B flat minor to E flat 7. We're still 2-5ing now by half step, A minor to D7, A flat minor to D flat 7, G minor, 2, 5, 1. We don't get the 1. We get 3, 6, 2, 5. Okay, but we're heading to 1. Okay. So all this stuff, it looks like a lot of changes, but they're all logical in the context of what's important. The important changes in the blues, which is the 1, the 4, and in the in the ninth bar, either the 5 or a 2 leading to the 5. Okay, so let me do the whole thing just real briefly for you, just arpeggiating. Okay, and now we're back up to 1. That was a lot of harmonic stuff in there. That was a lot going on. So I have then done my harmonic analysis the same way I did on this first one. I took my thirds and my sevenths and I just outlined them in the most smooth way, okay? I did have to, I noticed when I was writing this out, I had to jump the octave between bar 4 and 5 because otherwise it was going to be way off the staff eventually, and I didn't want it to get that way. I wanted to keep things comfortable and in the staff so it's easy to hear and to play, okay? So I didn't, so that's an inconsistency, right? You go, well, D flat should go to D, but you jumped up here for the D. Yeah, I did. So I changed the octave on you, sorry. So just for the sake of legibility. But in terms of playing, now I've got a handle on it, okay? I could also just easily take those pairs. Okay, all right. I'm sorry, that may not be very easy to hear as I'm kind of fumbling through it myself, but what I'm trying to get across is that I can use the same idea of thirds and sevenths to find my way through this chord progression. The more ways that you can approach something, the better you know it. And that's really, really true when it comes to improvisation. So people say, well, tell me the rules for improvisation. I say, well, you know what? There aren't really, it's really, if there's anything, there's too many of them. And you don't want to tie yourself into knots. But if you find one thing that works for you approach-wise, then stick with that. Make that part of your fluency. Make that part of your language. Learn that. Then, once you have that under your fingers, you say, I don't need to do this anymore. Now, let me go back and let me look at it in this other filter, you know, and add that to it. And that's really how you get it. All right, so not being able to leave well enough alone, I did keep this going for one more time because I thought, wouldn't it be kind of interesting to do John Coltrane's Giant Steps Changes in a blues, which he never really did that much. He did it in longer forms, but I thought, what if I did it in a 12-bar blues? What would that look like? So that's what this last one is here. This is not something John Coltrane ever did. Blues for Alice, by the way, Charlie Parker did write Blues for Alice. This is not my changes. These are his changes, okay? But Blues for Train is just something that I put together for this. Basically, Coltrane Changes are a way of dividing the octave into even thirds, okay? And what you have to do is look at the major chords. So if you're an F, then he's really going to a D flat, okay? And then he's going to an A. And then if you were to keep that sequence going, the next would be F again, okay? So it's kind of a symmetrical dividing of the octave. So the key centers, the Giant Steps pushes you into are very unlike one another, especially because they're coming at you very fast. So let me I'm not going to play these second chords of each. I'm just going to play you the first chord, the F to a D flat to an A, back to an F. And that sequence sounds like this. Okay. Those have little to do with one another. That's the idea. The idea is to throw key centers at you. These other chords that are in there just happen to be the 5 of each of these major chords. So that's where they came from. So the A flat 7 is functioning as the 5, which is what it is, of the D flat major. And the E7 is functioning as the 5, which is what it is of the A major. And the C is functioning as the 5 of the F major. So now we have let me give you a better read than that, sorry. Go back to the F. Okay, and that's Coltrane Changes. And then I did the same thing on the 4 chord. Okay, so again, important thing is the B flat, but it's not a 7. It's not a dominant 7, it's a major 7, because we're going to do the same cycle again. Okay, so starting on B flat this time. Okay, I added that. All right, now I went through this sequence after I wrote it, and I put the thirds and sevenths in, plugged those in to see if they made any sense at all. And what I came up with as I, looked at it and practiced it is that this is not a helpful tool. This is not a helpful tool for, a short form John Coltrane based tune. I guess it's kind of helpful, but it's not enough, because John Coltrane's constructs are basically vertical when it comes to giant steps changes. It's basically up and down, up and down, up and down. So when I'm looking at it, I'm kind of going, okay, well, and I'm going to create something that sounds like these changes obviously want me to be sounding like. I'm going to have to do more notes. More notes than those thirds and sevenths. Okay, so I really put that one on there just to talk a little bit about Coltrane Changes and giant steps changes and how they're structured, but they may or may not be as useful in certain situations. Where Coltrane himself used them, I noticed that in the tunes where he uses giant steps changes, and I'm playing a lot of his tunes this semester because we're doing a lot of John Coltrane songs. It's a John Coltrane season. And almost invariably, when he uses these kind of progressions, he always provides some kind of a resting spot after them, In other words, in a blues, they come too fast. They're too concentrated. But he took George Gershwin's But Not For Me, for example, and he superimposed Coltrane Changes over the beginning of the tune, okay, where it's fairly static in one key. And he added Coltrane Changes to it. But then it resolves, this 8-bar phrase, and then it sits a little bit. So you kind of get your bearings again. And then he does the same thing again in a different key center. And then he sits again. And the tune Giant Steps does the same thing, right? You do have a thing that happens really fast in the first 4 bars, but then it kind of relaxes. And then it happens again in the next 4 bars, and then it relaxes again. So I think that's a more useful way of incorporating Coltrane Changes, is to understand that he didn't, throw them at you without giving at least some small toehold to the improviser. So they weren't always having to negotiate these very different sounding key centers in a very short period of time. Because he's in da da dee da 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 da. I mean, that's how fast the chords are coming at you. Those are the half notes. If you didn't have a rest, you'd have a heart attack. All right. So I think that has taken us to the point where I've gone through all of my prepared stuff. And if anybody, again, has any questions or discussion, I'm certainly open to it. We have about 10 minutes left, looks like.
My
Give us a
question,
lot. Oh, go ahead.
my question is, what is that last chord that a jazz band will end on that doesn't sound like any chord?
Are you just talking in general or something that we talked about tonight?
No, in general. You know, you hear a jazz band play and the very last chord with the fermata is a non-tonic chord that sounds like it's related, but it's not quite tonic. What goes on there?
Well, a lot of times they will, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule, so it just depends, I guess, on the situation. But a lot of times they'll go down a step, right? Like if the tune is in D, they'll end on a C7, you know, or they'll hit the D as a stinger, you know, right? So, something like that. That might be what you're hearing sometimes. Sometimes it's just, it goes somewhere completely harmonically unrelated, just as a twist, as a final twist to trick the listener into thinking, you know, you're the casual listener here, right? You're listening thinking, wow, I kind of like jazz. And then they end on this really weird note, weird chord, and you go, no, I don't like jazz. they completely screw with my expectations there. And, you know, and now I'm pissed off at jazz again. So I can leave, you know, happy. No, I'm being a little facetious, but I don't know the answer to your question because there's probably a lot of different ways to do it. But going down a step, going up a half step, you know, I mean, all kinds of weird stuff. Whatever pushes you out of the key center of the expectation, I guess.
Michael, what was yours?
Oh, I was just going to say he gave us a lot to chew on. So,
from a conductor's point of view, let's say that ACWE was going to do a jazz piece, and let me interject here. When I was in the Army band and running sound for the jazz bands, a lot of their practice was every single instrument would take a 12-bar or 24-bar ride. So the audience that was hearing us once was, you know, they seemed to enjoy it. But if you listen to the same concert more than once, it got a little bit monotonous. Hearing every single tune, every single one of, you know, with 5 trumpets, 4 or 5 saxes, 4 or 5 trombones, then the bass, the guitar, I'm sorry, the bass, guitar, and the set, all of those would take a ride. So what would be an hour and a half, 2-hour concert would go about 3 hours.
Yeah.
What do you think is a good balance for saying, okay, we got 12 bars here. How, you know, per tune, what's a good balance of how many instruments can take a ride per tune and not get too down in the weeds, not get too cumbersome with the listener?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and this is one of the pet peeves of, you know, a lot of jazz band judges, is hearing all these you know, lame ass solos one after the other. I think that if there is a way to divide the form, because if you go back and listen to some of these old big band records, a lot of times somebody's solo, their entire solo might be 8 bars, and that's it. And then somebody else takes in, you know, jumps in and you know, takes over. If you have that going on enough, then you can actually feature a lot of people, and it still won't feel too daunting because, you know, they're not getting that long to play. So that's one solution, is to limit the amount of time. Now, everybody doesn't get a full chorus, you know. Maybe they get an A section, or maybe they get up to the bridge or whatever. The other thing is to kind of find your good soloists, right? The ones that are sort of the crowd pleasers, and space them out so that you have, a couple of people, excuse me, you have a couple of people who are, can be fairly convincing, and space your weaker players in amongst them. Okay, I know that doesn't help in terms of your momentum, but it does make it a little bit easier on the listener. And the other thing is simply don't try to get everybody in on the same, on the same tune. I mean, if you're programming 6 tunes in a concert, and you got what 24 people, well, so 5 or 6 of them in a song. Or you can call a blues where it's a short form and knock out a bunch of them at once. Then you only have one song, that is a challenge to listen to, and then the others are more within reason. So, I mean, there's lots of different programming choices, but I do hear what you're saying about having too many soloists. That the whole too many cooks thing. It doesn't even work when the players are burning soloists necessarily. You have to you can't wear out your audience. I assume there's things like shout choruses and things that backgrounds and things that can break it up so that you've got some interest happening regardless of what's going on in the solo section or the soloists themselves. If the band is doing interesting figures, there's that. When we did the Count Basie season several years back, we were doing these charts we only had a 10-piece band. That's all the room we had for, that's all the budget we had was to be able to do 10 pieces. Well, these Basie charts were written for big bands. So they were scored for 22, I don't know, about 22 musicians. And so we had to figure out, where to, not only just where to change the arrangement, obviously, but also where to put in repeats so that we could do solo sections that were very short. And we found one thing that worked really well was to have, say you have a 12-bar blues chorus, and it's got backgrounds in it. Well, originally the chart was only written for, Lester Young to play solo there. That was it. Okay. But we want 6 people to play solo there. So we gave each of them 2 choruses. And on the first chorus, it's just them with the rhythm section. The second chorus, we add backgrounds. Okay. It's the same backgrounds for every soloist. It doesn't matter, because the soloist is what creates the interest. Okay. So everybody's solo. Here I stand up. My tenor stands up. Wait, yay. I've got a solo, with the rhythm section. And now I get to take another one, but I'm getting kicked by these backgrounds, punchy backgrounds, that Basie wrote. Okay. And then it all goes away for the next soloist, trumpet player. Same thing happens for him. You keep the interest going that way. So that is one, perhaps a way to still maintain interest for the listener and get a fair number of your soloists taken care of. Does that make sense?
Do you have a list of tunes that are jazz based that are kind of written out, so are folks who aren't necessarily great at improv or improv is non-existent in their life that they can just read what's on the page and come out sounding like a good jazz player? That a band might be able to play?
Well, you know what? I don't, that's not my background. I'm more of a combo guy. So I wouldn't be able to help you, point you to any charts. I do know somebody who would be an excellent resource though. Excuse me. And that would be Paul Baker, who writes charts and, and he writes for all levels too. So that's somebody I guess I would look to, because I know that he has been doing things where he does write solos into the, sometimes what they'll do is they'll take a well-known tune by Basie and they'll find a not too terribly hard solo for the trumpet player to play that's not crazy on range, or maybe they bring it down for them or whatever, and they transcribe it, right? And they might simplify it too, because maybe the player plays too many notes or has technical passages that a younger player can't really master. So that kind of stuff is out there. It takes a fairly well-versed curatorial hand, I think, to still make music out of it, and not make it sound like it's something too simple. But those charts are out there. And again, I would bring Paul Baker into it. I mean, I think Paul Baker would be excellent in one of these kind of sessions if you still have any holes, because I know that when it comes to big band type stuff, he can do it. Another person, so give you more than one name, is Dan Tarosian, okay, who also does a lot of arrangement. Both of those guys do a lot of arrangement. Paul Baker and Dan Tarosian, Torosian, and they are both on Facebook and not hard to find at all. So those are two people that I think can answer that question much better than I can, because I'm at sea when it comes to that. I don't know. I know it exists, but I'm just not up on it.
Well, it looks like we're a couple of minutes over on time. So unless anybody has a burning question, we probably ought to wrap up at this point. And I do have a quick poll here. So if those that are still hanging in there with us could quickly do the poll here, that would be great. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it kind of just helps us to know if y'all are liking these things. Does anybody else have anything else to ask our wonderful presenter? I think we wore them out.
Well, you know what? That's fine, but
Yeah.
I tend to dump a lot of stuff on folks, and that's just how I am. But I do want to say, Thomas and Michael, thank y'all so much for having me at this.
Sure.
I had a blast. It's always fun to talk about music, and hopefully some folks got some stuff out of it. But I enjoy doing it, and think of me anytime, for this kind of situation. Always fun. And thanks for considering me this time around.
Yeah. Thank you for talking to us. We're trying to keep our members engaged during this downtime.